Esther was on the border between the Tkufas Hanavim and the Tkufa of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So it's right there on the cusp. Sefer Esther was the Soif Kol Han-Nisim Shenitein Lichtay, the Gemara says. It was the end of all written miracles. Doesn't mean there's not any miracles any longer, but this was on the border there because it was already in Golus, as it was after the Purim by Rishon. It's already in Paras, and it was a tkufa, a very interesting tkufa, which needs to be understood because it was a tkufa where there were still Nevi'im around, probably Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi. Those were probably the Nevi'im that were around, and there were already chochamim around, and it was Ezra HaSofer, who was one of the founders of the Anshe Knesset Agdola, that created a committee to oversee the Golus and then the transition from Golus back into Eretz Yisrael. You have the last Svarim of Tanakh, Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, even, and Esther, and the Ksavim of Esther. So it was there on the borderline. So it was an interesting, Kabbalistically, it was very interesting tkufa because Hashpa was coming in two directions. The tkufas Hanavim, so the Hashpa came milamala lamata. That was the way it went, starting with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, was Makabel the Torah. The tkufa later on of Rabbi Akiva was a tkufas chochamim, which we learned about. And that was a tkufa where we generated the Torah. Was a new type of nevuah. We learned it was the nevuah of Torah Sheba'al Peh, where we went at it from the bottom up, shat, remez, drush, soid, as opposed to soid, remez, how's it go? Soid, drush, remez, and pshat, until we got to the pshat. But it was the same thing, but in a different direction. And it could be that it even got to the same place, because Chacham Adif Minavi. Somehow or another, a Chacham is unlimited, because if you think about it, if you're Makabel, so you're Makabel what you're Makabel. You're Makabel what you're Makabel. There's a finite aspect to the Kabbalah. You're Makabel what you're Makabel. If I'm pouring water into your cup, it's the amount of water that I'm pouring into your cup. It doesn't make any difference how big your cup is. If you're generating, if it's a mayan, if you're generating the water, it's more of a ein gvul, and in that sense, you're not limited to what you could go further. You can go further and you're further, but there's also a limit. But a chacham actually is adif minavi. So Esther, we learned the tkufa of Esther, the tkufa of the Anshe Knesset Agdola, which was the tkufa of Esther, was on the one hand Esther Lavshasa Malchus. She received nevuah, and we find in the Gemara Megillah that Mordechai had some nevuah also. But it was the last words of the Megillah is Ratzui l'roiv echad parsha mimena or mimenu mixas Sanhedrin. That it didn't necessarily match with the chachma of the new door. So you had must have been a very, very wonderful tkufa in a spiritual sense, because on the one hand there was a groundswell of chachma, which started with the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and that changed everything in Yiddishkeit. They did things like the Mervatel Yitzrei Shel Avodah Zarah, Mervatel Yitzrei Shel Arayis. The Anshe Knesset Agdola moved us into Eretz Yisrael and built the Bayis Sheni, which was a different type of a Bayis than the Bayis Rishon.
What's the dynamic between?
In the Yisarusa D'Lusata.
Was the dynamic between Mordechai and Esther also a dynamic between the Chacham and the Navi?
I don't know Mordechai and Esther, but there was Ratzui l'roiv echad v'lo kol echad. You see that it was a lot of it was going b'nevuah. So you had this Dusi tree. You had this two-way street that was going on. That's in the time of Mordechai and Esther, the combination of nevuah and chachma. The nevuah and chachma. So that was the time of Esther. So here we are. The whole davar. Do you have this inside?
Top of the column on the
The whole davar who Olam Shanah v'Nefesh, K'mash Isa v'Sefer Yetzirah. Okay, we have to spend a couple minutes on this simple sentence from Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is the site of all Sefer Kabbalah, and tells us actually how the world was created, which is what Sefer Kabbalah is about, the mechanics under the hood of how the world was created and how we're Sefer Yetzirah, how the world was. It specifically deals with in the four Elamites, there's Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. So the world on top of us is Yetzirah. So the Sefer Yetzirah ostensibly deals with Yetzirah. It's not called Sefer Bria. It's not called Sefer Atzilus. It's called Sefer Yetzirah. It's not called Sefer Asiya. Sefer Asiya is halacha. Halacha l'maisa. Halacha. That's what the word halacha means. The derech asher yelchu by. Yetzirah is a step higher. So the Sefer Yetzirah explains. Some say it was written by Avraham Avinu. The Sefer Yetzirah explains Chol davar hu ba'olam shana v'nefesh. Just by the way, it's a difficult thing to understand, but it's probably the most important yesod of all Sifrei Chasidus. This is what. I'll explain to you why. After Sifrei Chasidus, which took Kabbalah as their flag, which is altogether interesting in the history. Chasidus was for the common man. The whole point of Chasidus and the Baal Shem Tov was to lift up the common man, the water carriers, the hunters, the butchers. That was what Chasidus was all about. And yet, if you looked at Chasidus Shesvar, most literature people don't even understand them because it's talking about Kabbalah. So it's like so funny, sort of a mismatch there between the pashtus of the people and the historicus of Kabbalah. That's the Baal Shem Tov, who started a very, very successful movement, combined these two things, which is Hafla V'Fela. And it's a little bit like what we're talking about. It's a little bit like this Man Esther. Because on the one hand, there's something coming Milabala, and there's something coming Milabata. So it seems. But
there was another Tekufa switch around that. It's not also.
What do you mean?
At the time in the Baal Shem Tov, there was a switching to the next Tekufa at the time. So it's also
the paradigm shift of that time.
It's also a time of mixture and different.
It's clear that it was a time of sight. Time of sight, time of the grach, time of sight. It wasn't. You look at what was going on with the Sephardim. It was a time of hiskalus hasayt. See, but it's hagufa. It's hagufa. It's not about the sight. It's about the hiskalus. And the hiskalus is the generation that we live in. So it's not about the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's about the water carriers that are carrying the sight. Because now there's the Hiskalus HaSayt. The famous story of the Baal Shem Tov's brother is that the Chabadniks like to sing is Masai Kasei Baruch Shiafutzu B'Nasecha Achutza. That there was a dream that when is Mashiach coming? Masai Kasei Baruch, the Lashon of the Gemara, and the answer in the dream was Shiafutzu B'Nasecha Achutza, when the Mayonis be Medayik. By the Bayonos, that which is coming Milamata is going to, meaning all that Shefa is going to go out, but it's going to come to Hiskalus. It's about Hiskalus, which is why Chabadniks feel like everybody should learn Hasidus in order to bring Mashiach. I'm not taking political sides here. I'm just saying the Metzias. The Metzias is that the Shita comes from the fact that it's all about Gilui Sight. It's all about Gilui Sight. So it's Dafka. To the whole Hasidic movement is dafka to those that were the plain people, to take the esoterica out of Yiddishkeit, to take the elitism out of Yiddishkeit, to bring it down to the earth. So if you look at the Yesod HaKabbalah, which is in most Sifrei Chasidus, in one way or the other, it's always a description of Olam Shana Nefesh, which is abbreviated so you can remember as Oshon. Oshon, smoke. What does smoke do? It goes from Gashmius to Ruchnius Kilo. You're taking something which is in a touch and feel form, but you're turning it into, you're breaking it down to its finest components until it becomes smoke, which also has very fine components until it disappears it becomes vapor. I don't know if it's correct scientifically, but it's correct in my mind. So it goes from Bilamata Labala. That's the whole Oshon of the Karbonos. There's a Reach Bichoyach Ishel Hashem. So the Oshon in Hasidic language is Olam Shanah Nefesh. So let's try to understand what it means. This you find in the Kedushas Levi, he's Myrich in this Yisoid, he teaches this Yisoid in Parshas Vayero by the Akedah. Find the Balatanya is Myrich in this Yisoid. These were the heads of Hasidus, the main teachers of Hasidus, the Balatanya, the Geras HaKodesh, Perek Aleph, Perek Beis. It's all explaining Olam Shana Nefesh. Even though they all explain it, doesn't mean I understand it, by the way, but I just a little bit, Lufi Asagasedu, that can understand why it's from Sefer Yetzirah, which is Kabbalistic, why this becomes the Yisoid of Hasidus is a very interesting thing.
And Shalom packages it for us.
Does he? Oh, maybe that'll be helpful.
He has a really clear way to take the Yisod that was brought by the earlier generations and put it in a language that we can access.
Hasidus in general, I mean.
In general, but in this derech of Oshon.
Derech Oshon.
He brings this a lot.
So let's understand as follows. Here's I believe Levi gives this mushal. And to me, the mushal explains as much as possible to understand. You have a little child, maybe a 2-year-old. You have a father, maybe a 40-year-old, and what's the yachas between the 40-year-old and the 2-year-old? Well, the 40-year-old knows this is my son. I have to take care of him. The yachas is pshita. I have to do whatever I take. What's the yachas of the 2-year-old to the 40-year-old? There's a lady like it's beyond really his hasaga to understand that this man is feeding me and protecting me and caring for my future, and it's not something which a 2-year-old understands. So what's the achas milamala lemata is possible to understand. The achas milamala is a very maybe there's an emotion to it, maybe there's a certain feeling of security to it, but it's not a matter of das. So what happens?
But there's a presence. There's a presence there. A baby knows its mother, and there's a very, very deep connection.
But the connection's not bedas.
No, it's not bedas.
So the way Kedushas Levi says that the father extends his hand and takes the hand of the child. Some say not a baby, but let's say a little bit more than a baby. Takes the hand of the child. So the child is now connected on many, many deep levels to the father. Hashotas yad lamata, very connected. There's a certain, this is the beauty of holding a little baby's hand when they're walking down the street, is that the beauty is that child is totally dependent on you. Knows that you're going to stop him from falling, you're going to stop him from going in the wrong place, it knows you're taking care of him. All of this is not bedas. All of this is a certain reliance. But what's happening is the hashatas yad lamata in the lashon of the Kedushas Levi is a kesher, which is a very, very deep kesher to something much bigger than his das. So he says that's what Matan Torah is. Matan Torah is a connection to something which was a mitzvah. The Kedushas Levi and the Balatanya and the Svasemes, they all take the lashon of Zohar, the word mitzvah, which means a commandment, obviously. Also, the Zohar learns as a lashon of tzeves. Tzeves is like a pliers.
Tongues.
No?
Tongues?
No. What do you call those things? It holds two things together.
A vice?
Vice grip. A vice, yeah. A vice. That's what a tzeves is. A tzeves is a vice, not tongues. It's taking two things and clamping them together. That's what a tzeves is. So mitzvah is, if you will, besides for being a commandment, of course it's a commandment, but besides for being a commandment, is also a tzeves. It's a handle on infinity. You have something coming from infinity, Ein Sof. And the Ein Sof is Kivyachol putting his hand down and we're grabbing onto the hand, that's the Oshon of Tzeves, we're grabbing onto the Yad Hashem, which is a term which apparently we're permitted to use. It's all over the Chumash. Yad Hashem, that's spelled like Kibhi. We're grabbing onto the Yad Hashem, and we're grabbing onto infinity, but it's not really with Das. We understand this piece. But just being hooked up into infinity gives us a certain infinite character. Like it's plugged into infinity, you know. But I don't want to mix metaphors, because if I start with electricity, it's a whole different idea. Let's just stick with the simple emotion that we all know. If we have children, if we remember being children, that simple kesher between the Av and Benoi, and it's what happens with this Tzeves, with this moment of connectivity, is that there's two opposite things that take place. On the one hand, what takes place is like, wow, you know, like who could ever, you could even begin to, like you're connected with infinity, you're connected with Ein Sof, who could even begin to understand infinity? Nobody can count. We can't even count finite numbers. We talked yesterday at Purim about somebody who has a couple of $1 billion, you know. So, you know, like I just pointed out, like, you can't even count to 1 billion. Well, you suffer. I mean, I don't recommend it. Just take the rest of your life. But I don't think you can count to 1 billion manually in your life. You would need something like some kind of a computer to do it. So you know that's how many dollars. You know, so but that's still finite. So when you're talking, that's still finite. It still has a number. It still has a misspur. We're talking about a misspur. Even stars, probably have a number. It's not infinite. There is a number, but it's like catalog. It's like
catalog the stars.
Yeah. Right. It's like infinity because it's beyond our ability to understand. So when one grabs the hand of infinity, so mitzad echad, like we're pushed away because we're so finite and we're trying to understand something which is infinite. So it's trying to grab onto something which is not grabbable. Mitzad sheni, the hand is coming to us. So if the hand is coming to us, that means there's a kirvas Hashem li toiv. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's Ein Sof, is connecting to us. And there's a certain kirva. So this is something which, so I say this is why this is the basis of all Sifrei Chasidus, because it's all about the Sof touching the Ein Sof and becoming infinite and part of their character. No matter how, in the world of Malchus, you can be very unsophisticated. The water carrying. There were people. See, I don't know, like it seems like it almost turned around over the generations, but there were people that really didn't, to my understanding, reading it, even what I saw as a kid. You know, and I'm not from pre-war Europe, but even what I saw as a kid, from many people that really didn't know how to read Hebrew or couldn't really get a Rashi, and Chumash correctly. You know, they had a very, very deep level of spirituality, very unsophisticated, but a very, very deep level of spirituality. But because they didn't know that things were wrong. You know, but the kids knew more than them if they did the right thing. If they didn't do the right thing, the kids. But there was a very deep level of infinity in a very, very finite body. It had almost turned around, which was fascinating, that the more sophisticated we are, and the more we get through that Rashi and even Shas over and over again, somehow we've delved into the finite. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to know Shas. It's a good thing to know Shas. Halavai, I do Shas, but it's a delving into the finite, and it almost somehow replaces the deep spiritual connection, the hand. So you know when you're talking, so like I believe, I'm not a Hasidic Rebbe, but I believe that the Sifrei Chasidus has to change sort of its gisha generation after generation, because the more sophisticated you are, it's almost a bigger challenge. This was the taina on the Talmidei Hagra. Like they're all extremely sophisticated in the world of halacha and shas, but are you holding the hand of the infinite? I mean, the answer is they were. They were big kedusha, but it didn't necessarily. I'm not talking about the Gra himself, but we're talking about the Gra was called a Goyin HaChassid B'Vilna. But we're talking about did it taka manifest itself? Did it extend itself to the man on the street? And the answer is it did not. It did not. It wasn't the same, but more sophisticated on the one hand, but it didn't connect. So what we're talking about here is this connection, the connection between Ein Sof and Sof. The connection comes forward in Olam, Shanah, Nefesh, in the Oshon. So Olam, Shanah, Nefesh are the three dimensions or three manifestations of Hashem's finite Bria, Olam. Shanah is the Bria of time. Olam is the substance that you see. And the Nefesh is almost, so it's Olam is just the Bria. This is an Olam. It's not turned on, it's like a stone. There's no big deal with it. It's just a Olam. And Shanah has a little bit of eternity to it because it's time. Like, in other words, Hashem created Avram Avinu, Yitzchak, Yaakov. We're the children of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So it's Shanah. Shanah means to repeat. Shanah means year. Shanah means time. Shanah means change. There's an infinite character to the shinui of Shanah. In Lashon HaGemara, l'shanois is to learn, to keep on. And Nefesh is even more infinite in the sense that it's connected to the Nefesh. Nefesh is the catch-all for Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Nefesh starts with the Nefesh, which is maybe our personality, and then moves up to Ruach and up to Neshama. So we're approaching but this is all in the world that Hashem created. Sefer HaYetzirah. This is all in the world that Hashem created, in the world of touch and feel. You have this Oshon. So what it is basically defines the world of Gashmias, and the world of Gashmias has a connection or a handle on the Ein Sof. So you talk about this paragraph, the Jews of Persia. They were Haman, and Haman's, which was still Shushan Purim. Haman's argument was that the Jews are no longer connected to infinity. They're just people. They started off Am Echad, but now they're Mefuzar and Mefayra Bein Amim. They're just assimilated. The Echad of Hashem is no longer with them. This was the time of Amalek. It's all here. Mefuzar, Mefayra Bein Amim. So, what Haman was trying to do, in my understanding, is he was trying to put a sof to the Ein Sof. There was an Ein Sofius to Klal Yisrael at one time, maybe the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Bayis Rishon, Nissim, the Shekhinah. The Jews from the time we left Mitzrayim, basically, until Purim, until Nebuchadnezzar and until Purim, which was all one family, Nebuchadnezzar to Achashverosh. Until that time, we were very Ein Sofi. Ein Sofi. So, finish. We're just part of the world, or Sof, and we're different. So just to get rid of us. That was. And Mordechai was saying that At im hachreish tafrishi leis kazois atu beis avich tovedu, that there's a tradition here, and the tradition is a tradition of Ein Sof. So there was a war going on between Haman, Dr. Sof, and Mordechai, Dr. Ein Sof. it was trying everything that could be done to end it already, because the Ein Sof of this was a tradition that Haman had from Amalek, to try to undo and disconnect this hand-holding thing that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This was Amalek already by Matan Torah. This was Amalek not wanting to see us holding on to the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being a representative in the Olam Shanah Nefesh of this world. So Haman says, we're living in a time. Haman says this is a good time. So Meduya, Kipil Pur. Isn't it amazing? Like the whole holiday is all named after the Goyrel. It's all named after the Goyrel, and it was like a bad Goyrel. It came out. it was a disastrous Goyrel. I mean, at the time, but the Arizal says that with the Zohar says that Yom Purim is Yom Kippurim, so it's referring to Yom Kippurim. Kippurim is referring to the Goyrel of Selah Hashem Selah Azazel. It's also a Goyrel. It's also a Pur. Well, it's not just words, but what he was saying is that Nevuah is done. Nevuah is the kesher between the Kel El Elyon and Klal Yisrael. Nevuah is done. The Beis Mikdash was destroyed. Nevuah is done. Now they're doing something else. They're dealing with Chachma, dealing with Anshe Knesset Agdola, dealing with earthy things. We can do that too. Nevuah is done. So Haman was one step behind himself, one step off, because what Nevuah had to be extended, it was done. It was pretty much done. Esther, Seif Kol Hanisim Shenitein L'Kazav. The Bible was canonized, closed. The people of the Bible closed. Let it become now a history book where everybody is connected to the Ein Sof once upon a time. But it's no longer relevant until Lavshas Ruach HaKodesh, until it was extended and segued into a whole new place on Purim, where there was a little bit more Nevuah and a lot of Ruach HaKodesh. And im hachreish tachrishi leis kazois, as Rashi says, the Targum Yonasan says, Targum Shady says, hachreish tachrishi leis kazois. It's time for you to do Nevuah. You could still be a Navi. So this was going. What was going on really? The real Purim story. I have to speak about that Pur a little bit more, but just hold it for like the Selah Hashem, the Selah Azazel. I was yesterday in my house that which I think is emes that if Yom Kippur is like Purim. So what's the menahafachu of Yom Kippur? So the answer is that on Yom Kippur there's such a metzias of zdainos nasik eschuyos. That's an amazing thing. Yom Kippur is zdainos. Is that an adolayota or what? Like Meidar Haba L'Baruch Mordechai zdainos nasik eschuyos. Haflu v'fela. How good is zdainos nasik eschuyos? Because you're crawling back into the world of Echad. Meaning that what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Boshit Yad, and what's your grabbing that hand? That's what tshuva is. Tshuva is, I'll tell you some more Zoharic Hasidic language. It's a bechina of Ratzui V'Shov. Ratzui V'Shov is that there's this give and take from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the minute Vashivaisa Levavecha, if we can connect on that very, very deep place of Levavecha, we're back connected to the Ein Sof. Once we're connected to the Ein Sof, once we're connected there, so it's the Stardust Nasa Kishkagos and Hamam and Mordechai, nothing makes a difference. It's all one Menahafachu. Menahafachu is the ultimate in connecting to infinite. What is infinity if not Menahafachu? In order to, do you understand this? In order for something to take sides and be black or white or bad or good, there has to be finity. It has to be finite. This is this, and that's that. It has to be categorized. Categorization is the opposite of infinity. But once you could connect to an infinite place, that's tshuva. So once you can connect to that place, so this is what Mordechai was saying. There's a new way to connect to the infinite. So this is the Dr. Sof versus Dr. Ein Sof.
Why is that called v'nahafochu?
V'nahafochu means that we're turning the Gashmias upside down. Meaning that we're instead of being Asiya, Yitzira, Bria, Atzilus, v'nahafochu, we could bring the Atzilus right here. There could be a matzav of even that's why even the Seir LaAzazel can get a kedusha. It's like, I was just at a very basic level. I was thinking that there's moments of Simcha. Simcha, according to the Svarah HaKadoshim, is a manifestation of Ein Sof. A person is besimcha, it's hard to be besimcha. But a person's besimcha, so that's a manifestation of, like, somehow or another, if you're besimcha, everything doesn't make any difference.
That's why we cry. It's out of our kelim.
Out of our kelim. Mamash out of our kelim.
That's why we cry.
So as a besimcha, like, it's hard to be besimcha all the time. But let's say a baby's born, or besimcha. What's the grace of Simcha? Hey, Baruch Hashem, I'm not going to sleep for the next year. Baruch Hashem, this is going to cause we just read something like close to $1 million in the course of your life. Baruch Hashem, like what are we saying? I mean, are we such tzaddikim? I mean, think about it. Are we such tzaddikim? I got to tell you, honestly, like, a lot of people come and talk about, whether they should have more children or not have more children. Like, they're not, those very same people that, like, they can almost say sometimes, like, they're so discombobulated by their responsibilities. The same people, when they have a child, so, like, they're in such simcha. It's like an amazing simcha. So, like, ma tiva shel simcha zu. Like, why? Everything about it, like, why simcha? Then we do even better. We go and we do an operation on the kid, on the boy. The blood and the moil, the white jacket and everything else. But simcha. Like, what is it? Is it a real simcha? I'm just, what's the essence of this simcha? And when does that simcha all of a sudden end? Like, how come when we look at our kids that are 10, 12, 18, 30, like, we don't have the same simcha? Like, what's the pshat is, I think this is Pashat pshat. The pshat is that when a child is born, there's a glimpse there for a moment of the Ein Sof. There's a connection with eternity, with infinity. Because all of a sudden, first of all, whoa, it keeps on going. So that's the infinity of Shanah. All of a sudden, Olam, Olam chatira b'chayecha, a person is the Olam. There's a metzias here of a living, breathing person, and certainly there's a Nefesh. So the Olam Shana Nefesh takes on an Ein Sof. And it's only when we realize at some point that this is a person that's not going to last forever, and we're not going to last forever to see it, when we get blurred by the Sof, we lose the Simcha of the Ein Sof. Simcha is Ein Sof, out of our kelim, as you say. It's the same thing as Simcha of Chassan V'Kala. A Chassan V'Kala, it's such an interesting thing. A Chassan V'Kala, they're walking away from that chuppah. But hopefully, they're walking away from their chuppah. If it's a good shidduch, like, there's mamash an Ein Sof in front of them. There's an Ein Sof in front of them. They walk away determined, and we're going to do it, and we're going to defy of history. We're going to make history. It's going to be dairais. We don't care what the whole world is doing. We don't care anything. There's, like, the yichud of a chasam and kala is yichud elyon. It's mamash touching to the infinite until you have your first fight. Sof. So right away everyone start talking about Sof. Is it the pshat in a Nisuyin who's thinking about Sof? It's a moment of Ein Sof. Later on, maybe there could be an Indian of Sof, but Shas Maisa, what's the big Simcha? It's a Simcha of Ein Sof. It's a Simcha of Ein Sof. It's a Shatos Yad Milamala Lamata.
Perhaps the birth of a child has the connotation. It's another link into infinity.
That's exactly
So
right.
therefore, yeah, so you're continuing.
Eternity
the chain,
and
right.
infinity
It's
are
the
two
future.
ends of the same rope that
It's the
doesn't
future.
end. Right?
Right.
Like, where does this go? So,
One's Olam, one's Shanah.
one's Olam, one's Shanah. Exactly right. Exactly right. There's other areas of Simcha. You think about it? there's other moments of life.
Beating the IRS.
You know, sometimes like there's there's certain rebirths in our life. You know, times a renewal, a eureka moment, a moment of tshuva, the simcha that the Sfarim tell us that we should feel if we did it right on Motzei Yom Kippur. There's a certain simcha that you see. It's exuberant. The simcha, you can't contain the simcha. Everyone's fasting, everyone's hungry, everyone's crying all day. Whoa, everybody's, it's not just like a release of tension because you're standing in one place for 24 hours straight. It's a simcha of rebirth. So it's what it means is that tiva shel simcha mahi, that one is nogeya into the Ein Sof. When you're nogeya the Ein Sof, if you can touch the Ein Sof, and a real Baal Simcha, a real tzaddik, can find the Ein Sof in all of Olam Shanah Nefesh, and if you can find the Ein Sof, then you've touched. So this is a tachlis of a person, is to find an infinite nature to everything that goes on in our lives. It's a big avodah, no? Very difficult thing. It's easier if you're learning Torah all day, I think. It's easier because the Torah itself has a lot of infinity in it. There's a lot of Ein Sof in the Torah, so like that's a little bit easier. If you're learning Torah all day, if you're doing mitzvahs all day, it's a little bit easier. But if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is living in the world of Malchus. No, I don't mean this politically. I'm just saying, the derech eretz kadmon l'Torah. You're doing what the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu was geyser ala adam to be mefarnes yourself and mefarnes your bnei bayis and to build and to be zoreya v'koitzer and all those things. So you're living in a very finite world, unless you could find infinity in it. So like if we're living like farmers, it's easier to find infinity. It's very finite, but it's very infinite. No, like. Emunasitecha zu seder zroim. Emunasitecha zerek zera la'afar. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu with his rain, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu with his weather, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu like Pella should deploy him, brings out infinity from something so absolutely finite. It's like an amazing phenomenon. So it's hard. Maybe it's hard. Is it harder to find like in computer programming? Is it harder to find if you're a lawyer, if you're a scientist? It's hard. I don't know. A rabbi, but the whole point is to. So this was the Esther, the connection. This is what he's teaching us here. The connection of the two different worlds is connecting in the Olam Shanah Nefesh, where you have a connection between in this generation. The generation of Purim is a connection between Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah. And I'm more difficult. Ruach HaKodesh is more difficult to find. That's what Nevuah is. Yeah, Nevuah is being able to see the infinite, something infinite beyond what everybody else can see. Beyond what everybody else can see. You can see something more. You can see until the Kisei HaKavod. So it's the Ein Sof that they're looking for. See, Al Pi Teva, the Jews of Persia should have been killed. The Minhafachu was that the enemy was killed. Meaning something infinite took place here. Yad Hashem. I don't know if everybody understood it. I don't know if we understand how did that happen exactly. Okay, we know this story, that story, Bixon Vasarish. We know a couple of stories here and there, but we don't really know, like how did this turn around? It came about through tefillah and through tshuva, because through tefillah and tshuva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought some Ein Sof into the Sof. Once there was Ein Sof into the Sof, the lights went on and everything turned around to a different place. So let's do a few words inside. Chol davar hu ba'olam shana v'nefesh. Everything in this world is ba'olam shana v'nefesh. Kimo. she'isa b'sefer Yitzira. U'b'nefashos, in the world of nefashos, nefesh is the part of us that receives nevuah into this world. Esther soif madregas hanevuah. Ki chol hanavim shahayu az mikvar. There was a history of Nevi'im with the Jewish people. And all the Nevi'im that were already there, Sharsa aleim hanevuah, they had their nevuah, meaning they were connected, their Sof was connected to the Ein Sof. That's what a Navi does, he connects to the Ein Sof. Rak Esther az he shenasis Nevi'im, meaning there were no new Nevi'im any longer since the Churban Beis Hamikdash. If you were a Navi, you had to be grandfathered in. There was no longer any new nevuah. Didn't happen. It was like those were just survivors. The Nevi'im were the old people that were survivors. This was talking. This was the Sreidas HaPleita. But Esther, she was the only one. Shenasis Nevi'ah. She, the only one that in the post-Beis Hamikdash era became a Navi. She became a Navi. She wasn't grand. Umimena v'hala, and from her on, like nimsa oidis chachas nevuah l'shum bria. Nobody ever received nevuah again. It's the chiddush because the Gemara says nitna nevuah l'chachamim or nitna nevuah l'shaitim, but it's not in the same way. Apparently, it's not in the same way. It wasn't. She actually was sharsa Allah nevuah. Kimi oz, because from the time of this is the pshat in Esther Seif Kolanistim. Kimi oz paska nevuah mi Yisrael. It was the end of nevuah for Klal Yisrael, the end of the Tkufa. Ubeksivas ha-Megillah, she and Mordechai were kisvuni no l'dayrais. Let this become. They were arguing with the Anshe Knesset Agdola. You think about that argument. There was an actual argument, petition. The Anshe Knesset Agdola canonized me. Look, there were great people since then that thought that they should become part of Tanakh also, but it didn't work out for them. You can't become part of Tanakh when you're not in the Tkufa of Tanakh. So they had to actually appeal and petition the Anshe Knesset Agdola. We want to be part of the canon. Kisvuni l'dayrais. What was the argument? The argument was that Tkufa's gone. Like forget about it. Let go of it. We're in a whole new tkufa now of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So this is Pashup Shad L'Psukim. What's the Kisvuni L'Daris? No, it would be like somebody. I remember when I was yeshiva Bachar here. So the two chief rabbis of Israel was Rav Goren and Rav Ovadia Yosef. That's out. They didn't get along on anything. They argued about everything. Everything. It was almost. They had I remember they had a radio show every Monday night where people would call and ask questions, and Rav Ovadia Yosef would answer. He was a relatively young man at that time. He was probably only about 80. But he would answer, then Rav Goren would answer, and it was just like an amazing everything. Argued about everything. So they never came up with the same answer. Rav Yosef and Rav Goren, two very chashuv people. But Rav Goren was also a poet. So they remember at the time they said that Rav Goren said that he thinks that his poetry about Shiras Yerushalayim and the conquering of the old city and all the wonderful miracles that should actually be part of the Tanakh. So somebody said to him that like Memches Nevi'im and Zayin Nevi'os and the canon is closed. So he says Memches Nevi'im, just get rid of Ovadia. Okay. See. Bottom line is that the canon is closed, and Esther was banging on the door, saying, "Open up the canon again, because we're still a little the Sheris Knesset Hagdolah, the Shiurei Knesset Hagdolah. We're still a little bit there. What does it mean on a deep level? It means that I still touched the infinity. Yes, we're in the world of self, but I still was able to, with Mordechai's encouragement, I was still able to get to the Ein Sof and change all of history. Look what she did, by the way. She brought, nobody knows, the end of the Purim story is not in the Megillah. The end of the Purim story is that we went back to Yerushalayim and we had built a Bayis Sheni.
Her son. Her son.
Her son Koresh. Yavesh, and the Tosfos brings this of the Medrash that the old lady Esther, when she was very old, she said to probably her son, Koresh, said, let the Jews build the Beis Hamikdash. The whole, let them go back there. This was the end of the Persian Empire. You let them build. There was a tzava from the Babi that the Persians have to let the Jews build the Bayis Sheni. So there was mamash in eternity that she did. It wasn't that she just saved the Jews from Haman. It was just the beginning, saving the Jews from Haman, and then switched them into a whole new geula of the Bayis Sheni. And the geula was a geula of Sof. It wasn't a geula. The nisim of the Bayis Rishon were not there. Nevuah was not there. In the same way, it was different. A different. All of Akasavaimer Shaftem Mayim Besasim Mimayone HaYeshua. We're digging for the water. Says the Gemara. Rak Esther Az Hi Shanasas Nevuah. She was connected to the generations of Mimena V'Hala Lo Nimsa Oidis Chachas Nevuah L'Shumbri. If you were a Navi, you were grandfathered in, but you can't become a new Navi. Kimi Az Paskin Nevuah Mi Yisrael Ubeksivas HaMegillah. Writing the Megillah Shehu. He's galus taikvay shalneis lechol hadairais, becoming part of the Tanakh as she did. Shehu nevuah hatzricha ledairais, shenichtava lepirsum nisa. That's the pirsum nisa aspect of Purim. Nevuah shenichtava ledairais. Right. So remember what the Gemara says in Megillah. The Gemara says that there were really thousands of neviim. Nevuah, when there was Nevuah in Klal Yisrael, there were thousands of people that Nevuah. So the Gemara asks, why was this Nichtava and this was not Nichtava? Why is this in the Tanakh and this not? So Nevuah she'otzricha l'dairais Nichtava. Nevuah she'lo yotzricha l'dairais lo Nichtava. Pshat. That if you're going to be a Torah Shemopeh, it has to be Natsach. So they say the Bishaydi, Letzach Yisrael lo Yishaker. This is all Letzach Yisrael lo Yishaker, right? Our Haftarah that we read on Shabbos. Letzach Yisrael lo Yishaker, meaning there's a Nitzchias, but the Nitzchias is all tied into Ein Sof. Right? Did we just say it? Eternity and infinity are two sides of the rope that we don't know where it begins and ends. But that's the Netzach Yisrael lo Yishaker. So the Gemara says, okay, if it's a Nevuah shehutzrich l'daris, even all the Nevuahs weren't eternal. It could have been for the moment. But a Nevuah shehutzrich l'daris, you're talking about Shuvah, you're talking about Mashiach, you're talking about things that we need to know. That's why. By the way, it's impossible to say that anything in the Tanakh is no longer Nogei us. Because if it wasn't Nogei us, then it wouldn't be in the Tanakh. There was plenty of stuff that did not get into the Tanakh because it wasn't Nogei. It's not like everything's Nogei. But it means that the Anshe Knesset Agdolah said, this is Nogei forever. And she wanted the Megillah Esther to be deemed as a Hutzrich L'Daris. This wasn't an isolated story. There was eternity here. There was Ein Sof. V'izgalus ha-Yeshua b'zechira lamala b'asiya b'poyel lamata b'chol Shanah. What she wanted was that it should become a holiday. A holiday is Olam, Shanah, Nefesh, is which bechina? Shanah. It should be repeated over and over and over again. Put eternity onto Yud Daled Adar. Put a bite of eternity there. Ha'sehi ha'ikar. Esther Mordechai, who tafala, and that's what's Megillah Esther. Even though somebody with their Purim Torah was saying in my house yesterday that today probably they wouldn't call it Megillah Esther because you put women's names in holy books, but it was called Megillah Esther. It'll always be called Megillah Esther because she was the one that touched eternity and brought it forward. כי עיקר הנס והישוע היה על ידי, שזהו סייף מדרגס הנביאים. שלא היה נס בשידוד הטבע כניסה יציאת מצרים ומשה רבינו עליו השלום. There were no miracles that totally went against nature, like Yetzias Mitzrayim or Yoshua, Eliyahu, Elisha, Kedayma, Al Bezesh, Yehi, Biksha Me'amelech V'Aser Ritzayna, except for this, that she completely turned over the teva. Just to say one last thing about it. Like it's so interesting the way the Megillah ends off. What do you want to do, Esther? Achashverosh says. He says, I want you to overturn the decree. I want you to overturn the decree that everyone's allowed to kill Jews. And what does the Melech say to her? I can't really overturn the decree. What I can do is I can make a new decree that the Jews are allowed to defend themselves and Zaman Kihila, right? The Jews can fight back. The Jews can intimidate the guy. I'll make it better. Like it's kind of like a chatzi shiur, Like why can't he overturn the decree? It's the Melech. Why can't he overturn? Ados nitno b'shushan habira. Why can't he overturn the decree? So what you're dealing here is two forces: a force of Sof and a force of Ein Sof. Achashverosh said, "I live in the world of Sof. In the world of Sof, a Melech gives a decree, it's chatzitri. Nothing can go back. You're introducing here a world of Ein Sof. You're introducing here like that. Okay, so it's teva, big deal teva. I'm not nispal from teva. Okay, so for that we'll make something new. So he couldn't get rid of the teva advarb is that when a Melech says something, that's what happens. That's the teva advarb. You want to argue with the teva and go the other direction? I'll accommodate you for that. So here you have, that one Maisa, those three psukim, you have the juxtaposition of Sof versus Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof one. The Ein Sof one, and hence Kisvuni L'Dairos, Chazal saw, okay, this is a story that can happen any time. What can happen any time? That the Ein Sof can be victorious over the Sof. Or more important than victorious, the Ein Sof can put its bimoshit yad to the Sof and create an eternity within the Sof gufa, within the Gvul gufa. Hence, that even though we live in a world of Sof, and we live in a world of science, in a world of finity, is that a word? Finity? Finiteness? We live in such a world, but we can bring in the Olam Shanah Nefesh in these dimensions. We can bring in the world of infinity and then be mushal everything. And we've seen it with our eyes. We've seen these nisim. Even in our days, we've seen these nisim. Eretz Yisrael, 6-Day War. We've seen nisim. We saw about Shuvah, we saw the Iron Curtain fall. I mean, we've seen nisim. This is all something that nobody was able to predict. Zero prediction level. Zero prediction level. There's no nevuah. But there was an Ein Sof working within the Sof, and somehow or another, things that were supposed to last forever crumbled. Two Xeris working in two different directions. Okay? I'll finish off on one thing.
You say that anything which is